You need to be on the right side of God. Like any healthy relationship, it can never be one-sided. Relationships are all about giving and receiving. God is the same. He is a loving and caring Father, but He wants a relationship with us. Hey there, I'm Ryan and I'm so happy you've tuned in today. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button over there or down below. Every subscriber means a lot to me and gives me the inspiration to continue creating Christian content that I hope will help you live a life that brings you closer to God and to Jesus Christ. So in today's study of the Bible, I want to keep talking about the first book in the Bible, Genesis. It's such a great Old Testament book filled with so many interesting people and their relationships with God. And a prime example of this is Noah. No doubt you've heard about Noah, and even if you aren't Christian, you would have heard the story about Noah and his ark and the great flood. It's been the subject of plenty of Hollywood movies, including one Hollywood epic with Russell Crowe and Anthony Hopkins in 2014. Noah's a fascinating character and a direct descendant of Adam. Get ready for this. He's the great grandson of Adam. As chapter 5 explains, he's descended from Adam through the chronological descendants of Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Methuselah, and Lamech, who is his father. The other part that's fascinating about chapter 5 is how long both Adam and his descendants were living back then. Adam lived for a total of, get ready for this, 930 years. Wow. And his son Seth lived for 912 years. And this pattern continues throughout the line in Adam's family. Noah's own father, Lamech, was 182 years old when he had Noah and lived to the ripe old age of 777 years. Clearly there was something in the food and the water back then. These days we talk about the Okinawan diet. Instead we should be studying the Genesis diet. But God changes His plan around how long people will live. As He says in chapter 6 verse 3, the Lord says, "My spirit will not contend with humans, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years." Interestingly enough, in my own research on the oldest humans in our modern era, the longest human lifespan, which is undisputed, is that of Sarah Naus, an American who lived from 1880 to 1999, a total of 119 years and 98 days. Clearly, God's plan is playing out. Back to Noah. As it says in chapter 5 verse 29, he named him Noah, he being Noah's father Lamech, and said, "He will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." This is a reference to God's punishment of Cain, where God says in chapter 4 verse 12, "When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you." Noah was something of a late bloomer. He didn't have his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth until he was 500 years old. However, Noah found favor with God in chapter 5 verse 8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. But let's paint the context of this era and why God favored Noah. Adam and Eve were long gone, and generation after generation had come, and as humans established themselves in a life outside the Garden of Eden and outside of that sacred bond that God had established when He created the universe, humans had begun to drift away from goodness and light and into darkness. Chapter 6 verses 5 to 7 is powerful. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that He had made humans on the earth, and His heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, "I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." Wow. Wow, this is the first time that God has looked upon His creation with sadness, with despair. Imagine You are the creator of this wondrous universe with everything measured in billions and trillions, something you have made everything out of love with, and with your perfect will, full of grace and hope. But then your creation rebels against you. Humans are no longer grateful for what you've given them. They disrespect your requests, they ignore you, they don't talk to you, and betray everything that you hold so valuable. No wonder God's heart was troubled. If you're the father of someone doing terrible things, your natural inclination is to be troubled, to be saddened, to feel responsible for what's going on. Now, we don't know exactly what wickedness was happening in God's creation in the human race. The Bible leaves very little apart from that which can be found in chapter 6, verses 11 to 12. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. Notice how these verses refer to one word repeatedly: corrupt. Creation was corrupted. Human beings had become corrupted. If you look up the definition of corruption, for example, on Merriam-Webster.com, you'll find this definition. It says, a departure from the original or from what is pure or correct. In chapter 1 of Genesis, many times the Lord looks upon his creation as being good. He had created something marvellous, something crafted of his own hands out of love and grace, and so it follows it had to be good. It couldn't be anything else. So if creation was good and now it was corrupted, it's a natural conclusion to assume that this was because of one thing: humankind separating from God and choosing how they wanted to live. Humankind were no longer good. They were corrupt and unrecognizable to the living God who had created them. Worse, they had become violent. Violence can take many forms: physical, emotional, and spiritual. It can be perpetrated against other humans as well as animals and the environment. But in the context of this verse, we don't know what violence was occurring, because it doesn't really matter. Because the point that God is trying to make is that violence is a manifestation of something a lot worse. Violence is the outcome of hate, the opposite of love. Hate is not in God's vocabulary. He is a God of love and grace. So God is seeing corruption of the one thing integral to all of his creation: love. And he is deeply troubled by what he is seeing. People had become wicked, and every thought was of evil, of doing things against what God was all about. So God was troubled. He had made the decision that his creation was a mistake. That despite his grace in allowing Adam and Eve to continue to live after they had broken his one and only rule in the Garden of Eden, humans had continued down the road of separating from God and his love. Think about this for a moment. A loving God who created the universe, created our planet, now determined to see the end of humans, and not only humans, but life on earth too. Let's not forget that God was determined to see an end to animals too. This is powerful. The expectation God had of humankind was unfulfilled. It wasn't God's fault. He had blessed these people with free will, the ability to make their own choices since they left the Garden of Eden. But consistently through free will, they had chosen a path that didn't lead to God, but a path that led to evil. Now, we don't know what type of evil was happening, as the Bible doesn't provide us details, but we can only imagine it would have been things like stealing, adultery, murder, idolatry. All the things that God explained to us later in Exodus were evil. But amongst God's despair, he found something that offered him an alternative view. He saw hope. He saw that perhaps his creation wasn't a wasted effort, and that things could turn around. And that hope was in Noah. As chapter 6 verse 9 says, Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. But God liked Noah because he was not only a good man, but he was a naked man. He was naked before God. If you recall from earlier in Genesis, Adam and Eve, by eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge, had awareness that they were naked in front of God. So they began to hide from God. But Noah wasn't like his ancestors, all the people of the day. In Noah, God found someone who was unafraid to be naked in front of him and maintained a relationship of transparency with God. So in this relationship of transparency, God tells Noah to be prepared and shares his plans. Big plans. Plans that are going to create dramatic change. God is about to wipe the slate clean and press reset on his creation. This is big. That this will have massive impacts on Noah and his family is an understatement. Chapter 6 verses 13 to 14 says, "So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out." And then God goes on to say in verses 17 to 19, "I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you." We're not talking about God destroying a city here. We're talking about God destroying all of his creation, starting again with someone who has the purity of heart that God sees is missing in everything else. What does this story tell us? It tells us that God does not reward sin. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and while we have found redemption from sin through the blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, God's position is eternally clear. Sin is not good. Sin corrupts, and corruption leads to more sin, and so that cycle continues. And God makes it perfectly clear that corruption creates separation from his creation and from him. As God says to Cain in Genesis, "But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." It also tells us that God cherishes and rewards relationships, and Noah is a case study for us when it comes to a relationship with God. God's relationship with Noah is a two-way relationship, the type where people are unafraid to be naked in front of God and communicate with him as their best friend, their father and creator. A relationship based on truth and not hiding things. God is omnipresent and knows everything, so it may seem weird that he seeks transparency when he already knows our thoughts and our deeds, but it comes down to the purity of our heart, the same purity you see in young children. So God sees Noah as someone who is uncorrupted, honest, and pure of heart. Things that shine like a beacon to God when he looks through the darkness that has descended on his creation. So putting all this together, what does it mean? It means you need to be on the right side of God. Like any healthy relationship, it can never be one-sided. Relationships are all about giving and receiving. God is the same. He is a loving and caring Father, but he wants a relationship with us. He doesn't want one-way traffic where it's all about us asking God for something. He wants us to engage with him, seek his guidance, share our thoughts and our plans, and wait for God's response. Being a God-fearing person is about recognizing God has a plan, and his plan will always trump your plan no matter what you have in mind. We should celebrate God's plans because God knows us like no one else will ever know us. He knows what is good for us, and his plans play out accordingly. His plans will always be far superior than what we could ever imagine, and will bring us the greatest rewards and joy in life. Think of a relationship with God like a two-way radio. You need to carry it with you all the time. It's not something you can leave behind when you undertake this journey called life. Just like Noah and his fantastic story of faith and relationship with God, God's voice should always be your compass by which you navigate this journey of life. I hope that you are always carrying that two-way radio and that you keep on the right side of God. So, a question for you. Are you keeping on the right side of God? What are you doing to build a relationship with our living God? Tell me more by leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Again, thanks for joining me today. And if you like this video, make sure to hit that like button down below and also subscribe by clicking over there or down below so the folks at YouTube can let you know when I release a new video. May God bless you.